So just ignore that you're on Zoom. Okay. Good morning. I will kick us off. Welcome to Grand Rounds. Welcome to February 1st. We are chatty in the room, getting breakfast, settling in, grabbing our coffee. Welcome to those who are on Zoom. A few announcements as we get started. Our next Grand Rounds is our new GREC director, Dr. Josh Yarrow. So that'll be in 2 weeks, February 15th. Also, we are resuming our Geriatrics Journal Club. So this will be February 8th. It's on Zoom. Brittany Highlander and Kate Runkle will be presenting articles. You will receive an evaluation for feedback, so please fill that out for today's Grand Rounds. You'll also be able to see the recording if you have a desire for that. And now to the more exciting part, introducing our guest, our speaker today, Dr. Abby Rolbiecki. She is a friend, a colleague, and we're so glad that she's here at University of Colorado. She has her PhD in social work and she's a researcher. She's an associate professor in the Department of Family Medicine. You'll hear a lot about her and her program of work, which is centered around the exploration of interventions designed to reduce suffering for patients experiencing serious illness and their care partners. Much of her work is focused on end-of-life care and then also bereavement. She's passionate about helping individuals find meaning in challenging times. She uses community-based approaches and a lot of novel methods that I think she'll share bits about. She's nationally and internationally recognized as a leader in primary care and palliative care research. She was awarded an NIA R01 for a study called Caregiver Speaks, a technologically mediated storytelling intervention for family care persons of persons living with dementia. And she is a co-I on several other funding opportunities. So we're really excited to hear more from her today. Looking forward also when you are fully relocated from Missouri to Colorado. So catch her while she's here. She comes once or twice a month to Colorado, and we're excited to have her as part of our community.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so thank you so much for having me today. I'm here to talk a little bit about my work, specifically using storytelling as a form of connection for people who have experienced adverse life events, mostly in the context of serious illness care, caregiving, and bereavement. Okay, so for those who don't know me, my name is Abby. You can call me Abby. I'm a new faculty member here at CU, and my departmental home is in family medicine, but I work very closely with folks here in the Division of Geriatrics. Like Hillary said, I was formerly from the University of Missouri, and I was in the Department of Family and Community Medicine before I made the transition here in September. So I started in September. I'm still living in Columbia, but my family's making the transition to fully relocate here this summer. So if you have a house for sale, please get in touch with me. Or a good realtor. So I'm a clinically trained social worker, and I have a PhD in social work. I also have an educational degree in public health, so I have an MPH and an MSW. And like I said, I'm here to talk about my research, which is largely centered around the use of storytelling as a meaning-centered narrative intervention designed to help family caregivers make sense of their caregiving experience. But before I get started, I'd like to share a little bit about where I'm from and why I do this work. And I have to say I'm a little nervous, so if my voice is a little shaky, that's why. Great, awesome. Okay, so as academics, we generally dislike slides that have a lot of text, and we really love slides that have pictures that sort of tell the story of what you're trying to convey to the group. So you're going to get a lot of that in my talk today. So here is a map, and it's really cool because I have the opportunity to tell people, hey, look, I was born in Honolulu, Hawaii. But unfortunately for me, This didn't last long. I didn't spend much time here. My family relocated to their hometown in Sherman, Texas, which is right on the border of Oklahoma and Texas, when I was about 3 years old. So I like to tell people that I'm a salty pepper. I grew up in a really tiny town northeast of Dallas, and I had a population of about 1,000 people in my hometown, and I had a graduating class of 40 students. And fun fact, my school had K through 12 all in one building until here recently. So it was a very small town, very close-knit community. This piece of my story is important because I feel it really begins to lay the foundation of my why, which is something that I'm going to get to later in this talk. But growing up in rural Texas and being a first-generation college student, my exposure to college prep was limited, especially compared to many of my colleagues, both at the University of Missouri and here at Colorado. So as a kid, I really had no idea what I was going to do with my life. And in fact, my high school guidance counselor told my mom that college just really wasn't in the plans for me, and that I should consider other options. And so when I graduated with my PhD and took a fellowship in the Department of Family and Community Medicine at MU, my mom took out a full-page ad in my hometown newspaper explaining that I, got my PhD, like Dr. Rolbiecki. And so that was a really fun thing for her to do, and it was really priceless. And my guidance counselor still lives there today, so it was fun for her to be able to do that. But I started college at Texas A&M. I transferred to the University of Missouri, where I completed my bachelor's degree, my MPH and MSW, and also my PhD in social work. But I'm sharing this because I believe that my origin and my life experiences have really shaped every page of who I am and who I've become as an academic. And I entered university life sort of as an underdog and not really knowing what it meant to be an academic. But as a student, and even now, I have this deep-seated curiosity about how people are able to overcome significant adverse life experience. So I really started to ask questions about how people are able to survive and be resilient and overcome these difficult life situations, which sort of launched me into my academic and research path. So real briefly, I completed my PhD in 2015 before I took a postdoctoral fellowship in the Department of Family and Community Medicine, where I started to apply my storytelling methods on a population of patients who often feel misunderstood in their illness. And so this was a study that I implemented with patients living with chronic pain. And we help them use their stories as a way to communicate their lived experience with their care team members and shift the focus of the conversation away from things like the numeric pain scale and pharmacologic intervention and more towards a goal of function. So when my fellowship ended, I took a faculty position in the Department of Family and Community Medicine. And I started working with an excellent group of hospice and palliative care researchers who really sort of understood that the methods that I study could truly shift the way patients and caregivers move about their lives, and that the power of storytelling, if implemented early, might actually positively impact their caregiving experience and also their bereavement experience. And this has been particularly true for a subset of familial caregivers, so dementia caregivers, who are vulnerable to experiencing a post-traumatic stress response as a result of their caregiving experience. And this limits them from sort of engaging in this meaning-making process, and thus their ability to experience post-traumatic growth in bereavement. So then from there, I moved here, and obviously this is where I'm at today. So the overall goal of my research is to reduce emotional and physical suffering and improve quality of life for those experiencing serious illness and their family care partners. And like Hillary said, I have a particular focus on end of life, and I've done a lot of work in bereavement. My research and practice is centered around this idea that people can make sense of and find meaning in their adverse life experiences, like chronic or serious illness and even death. And through storytelling, individuals can piece together the history of an adverse life event in a safe and supportive way. And in doing so, the storyteller can reintegrate the event into the overall context of their self-narrative, which then allows them to reclaim power over the impact of the story or the event and the power that it had on their life. And through this process, the storyteller arrives on the other side of the experience, feeling whole and healed with a narrative solely authored by themselves. And so I have two distinct lines of research inquiry focused on this goal. My first is to determine efficacy of meaning-centered narrative interventions for seriously ill patients across the lifespan and their family caregivers. And my second area is studying the development and implementation of technologically based interventions for persons who are seriously ill. So I'm going to briefly mention that line of work in one of my slides, but it is not going to be the focus of today's talk. Okay, so as a storyteller and someone who studies the power and impact of story, I feel it's only natural to begin my presentation sharing my own story and how it led me on this professional path. So much of my passion for this work is informed by my own experience as a sibling caregiver who became bereaved at the age of 18. So my brother, this is my brother and I, his name is Thor. He was born with a degenerative disease that compromised his ability to live what most people would consider a normal life. And growing up firsthand, I had this experience of what it meant to be a caregiver. I didn't really know that I was a caregiver, but I was very much folded into the caregiving responsibilities as a young kid. And so now, as a bereaved sibling, I'm familiar with this unique experience and the challenges associated with caring for someone who's seriously ill. And I actually, as somebody who's, kind of done a deep dive in the bereavement literature, I realized that I now belong to a group of research that has been coined, or researchers have coined the forgotten mourners, which are the siblings who became bereaved after playing a significant role in the caregiving demands. So yes, this is Thor. He had a disease called cerebral dysgenesis. And so when he was born, it progressively got worse over time. And he, at the age of 18, he moved on to a nursing home facility, and he died when he was 22. But what's interesting is folks who have cerebral dysgenesis, their life expectancy is usually around 11. And so I like to bring that up because we had round the clock nursing care, like ever since I was a little kid. And I really, if there are any nurses in the room, I really believe that he lived as long as he did because of the care that they provided him. And so I'm so grateful for the work that they did. Okay, so my search for meaning in my own experience really began when I was an MSW student, and I was actually working in trauma. So at the time, my work focused on helping survivors of sexual assault use their story to promote understanding of their unmet needs in terms of healing and safety. But in my final year as an MSW student, I took a course in narrative exposure therapy where I learned the method of digital storytelling. And one of our final assignments was to create a digital story about an important life event. And for some reason, I felt compelled to share my identity as a bereaved sibling and what it meant to be a bereaved caregiver. And this was the first time in my life that I really verbalized these experiences in a way that helped me. And it was the first time that I sort of started to make sense of it all. And I acknowledged how the events leading up to my brother's death fit within the context of my larger self narrative. And it was the first time that I really fully understood the power of story and how I can use my own personal story as a way to help connect with others and help them heal from similar experiences as mine. So from there, I began to critically explore the post-traumatic growth literature and the constructivist theories and the theories of meaning making. And I started to ask questions about why we stop at resilience. Why not go beyond resilience and use stories and connection as a way to help people integrate these experiences into their lives and truly grow and heal from them? And as I was saying this, I was just sort of reflecting. So it wasn't until this assignment that I started to talk about my sort of experience with my brother. And often, well into young adulthood, I would just tell people that I didn't have any siblings because I did not know how to talk about this experience in my life. And so now I don't do that. It's actually the foundation of literally everything that I do in my work and my life. So I do want to talk specifically about storytelling and connection. You all probably know this, but humans are intrinsically social beings. We're actually hardwired to seek connection from others over a shared experience. And human connection is defined as the bond generated between two or more individuals when they feel seen and validated. And these bonds promote trust and understanding and are crucial to the overall human experience. And during times of adversity, like caring for someone who's seriously ill or after the death of a family member, the desire to seek connection over that experience may intensify, as these adversities often create what constructivists consider a crisis in meaning. And so a crisis of meaning is like you experience an adverse life event, it disrupts the natural order of your world, and it creates this sort of existential experience in which an individual cannot make sense of the event or how it fits within the larger context of their life. And so one way individuals seek connection is through sharing stories about the adverse life event. And through the process of crafting and sharing a narrative with others who directly relate to the storyteller's experience, they start to build trust and experience validation and meaning making. And meaning making, which is like the crux of the work that I do, is essential to an individual's ability to remain resilient in the face of their adversity and to actually grow and heal from these experiences. So in my work, I use photos and other forms of digital media as tangible tools to help with the storytelling process and facilitate connection with others and also meaning making. Okay, so I don't know if you picked up on this, but I'm passionate about improving the lives of individuals facing serious illness and their care partners. And my career in research has been driven by this commitment to develop psychosocial interventions that alleviate suffering, enhance well-being, and foster resilience in these populations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my foundational work and how it sort of led me on this path. So like I said earlier, I started using a method called photo voice, which if we have any CBPR people in the room, community-based participatory researchers, that's a method that people use to typically generate some sort of social action around an issue that is often misunderstood. And so I applied the photo voice method with a group of sexual assault survivors on a college campus, and they were using the process as a way to sort of shed light on their experience and also their experience navigating the justice system on campus, and also bring awareness to the unmet needs that they had in terms of their safety and healing. However, in that process, I started to see that the act of engaging in photo elicitation, which is the use of photos to help communicate a lived experience with a health issue, that was actually very therapeutic. And they did start to sort of bond and connect over this shared identity that's kind of taboo to talk about. And so that started to pique my interest in, okay, this is a really powerful tool. So for my fellowship, whenever I was working for the Center for Patient-Centered Outcomes Research, the PI was like, this method would be really powerful for patients who are experiencing chronic pain. They actually largely have trauma histories, and it's an issue that's really sort of taboo or difficult to talk about. And so we developed an intervention where they engaged in the photo elicitation process in a facilitated support group online. So they would go into their lives and photograph images they felt captured their experience with chronic pain. They would discuss them safely in the support of their own group. But then they brought the photos to the office visit, where they used the photos to sort of create a discussion about functional goals for their pain experience, rather than, I want to take these meds, or I need to take these meds, or this is my pain score. So whenever I was in my fellowship, I got connected with some some palliative care researchers who really wanted to start to explore the power of this photo elicitation process in the caregiving realm. So I developed a small pilot called Caregiver Speaks, and I implemented Caregiver Speaks with hospice family caregivers of cancer patients initially. So Caregiver Speaks, and I'm going to go in depth here in a little bit, but it does use the photo elicitation technique. And then from there, I applied it to persons living with dementia, or caregivers of persons living with dementia, and that's my R01. But I also, in my initial sort of early career, was awarded lots of seed money and foundation money to develop a meaning-centered narrative approach using digital storytelling, which is going to be the other intervention that I'm talking about today. Across sort of all of these experiences using storytelling techniques with caregivers, one of the things that came out of their story was that they feel a significant amount of distress when their care recipient has anxiety or is experiencing pain. So that started to pique my interest in, well, what can we do to address those symptoms? And so I do study a variety of technologically based interventions that are non-pharmacologic in nature, designed to reduce symptoms for that population. But I hope that you'll invite me back to talk about that, because that's not going to be the focus of today's talk. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears and talk more specifically about Caregiver Speaks. So Caregiver Speaks is an NIA-funded R01 clinical trial of a photo elicitation intervention designed to help hospice family caregivers of persons with dementia make meaning of their caregiving and bereavement experience, as well as improve distress and coping among this population. So it's a technologically mediated storytelling intervention that empowers self-expression and meaning making, and is moderated by increased social support. And so we feel that all of this combined will reduce depression and anxiety during active caregiving, which will have a positive impact on their bereavement experience. So it uses the photo elicitation technique. So again, photo elicitation is the use of photos to elicit caregivers' thoughts and feelings about their experiences. And then they share these photos in a private Facebook group that's moderated by a facilitator to enable them to capture and share their stories in a supportive environment. So that's that social validation and social support piece. So here I have a sampling of a few photo stories. This is actually a very small sample. Obviously, we did Caregiver Speaks with over 400 caregivers. And so this is a small sampling. As an aside, as a qualitative researcher, I have never in my life had so much rich qualitative data. So if you have student learners or mentees who are wanting to learn how to do some really cool visual analyses and things like that, please send them my way, because there's just not enough human power to actually scratch the surface of the rich data that we have coming out of Caregiver Speaks. So like I said, we're actually in our final year of this project, so we haven't started to analyze our outcome data. We're very excited to do that, but qualitatively, we see that participants are benefiting from their participation in Caregiver Speak. So I did pull a sampling of some quotes. So this first caregiver talks about how it provided an outlet, a safe space for her to go to and talk about their experience without having to share it with their family. I think that would have been hard for them, but it was still an outlet for me. Another person said, I guess it was a way to talk about what you're going through and sharing. You find strength in sharing stuff with people. So this is sort of emphasizing the power of connection. I think the group made me feel more comfortable about caregiving. I mean, I knew the experience was going to be difficult, but the group helped me wrap my mind around it. So a little sense making happening there. liked being able to step back from the rest of the world around me, and it forced me to focus on what I was thinking and what I was feeling. I also liked seeing the other people's responses and knowing that other people were going through their own journey and in their own way. But a lot of times, some of the things I said and felt really mimicked and spoke to me too. So again, just sort of emphasizing the power of connection using this tool. So we're currently in our final year. We have published a few qualitative pieces with several more qualitative pieces currently in process. But if you did want to learn a little bit more about Caregiver Speaks, this first paper is our study protocol. So if you want to learn about the details about the intervention and the study procedures, you can find that here. The second paper is a visual analysis of the experience of caregiving for persons living with dementia. And this third paper is a methods piece regarding the opportunities and challenges for implementing qualitative and visual interventions among this population. So, you know, like I said, we're pumped to sort of do a deep dive in our outcome data. We feel confident that this study will make a meaningful contribution to the dementia palliative care evidence base, particularly as it relates to dementia grief and bereavement care for dementia caregivers, which is woefully understudied at this current juncture. I did want to say that this process has been really cool because I have been able to learn how to do visual analyses. So I engaged a visual artist and an expert in qualitative visual data collection methods. And so it was, if you want to know more about that process, I highly recommend checking out these papers. Okay, so digital storytelling. I'm going to shift gears to focus on this approach. So, you know, I was awarded some seed grant to develop this approach. So if you are in health education or have a background in CBPR, you might have heard of digital storytelling. As I did with photo voice and photo elicitation, I applied a meaning-centered sort of theoretical framework to this and built a therapeutic intervention using the digital storytelling method. And I have initially studied this with a group of bereaved family caregivers, but I have successfully implemented the digital storytelling workshop across a variety of study population, including bereaved dementia caregivers. So I'm going to highlight some data across sort of all these studies. And I've successfully moved this workshop to a fully virtual format. Thank you, COVID, for doing that. So really quickly, digital storytelling is a multi-method narrative intervention that combines one's sort of written and verbalized story with chosen artifacts and music. In digital storytelling, we help people identify the story that needs to be told, which is often the most difficult story to tell. And we help them craft it into a concise narrative and then pair it with artifacts of meaning. And so these components all fit together in a 3 to 5 minute video that they can share with other people or use as a form of continued bond with their deceased loved one. So I have provided sort of a table of the sort of lay of the land with digital storytelling. I have broken it up into 3 different story circle days. So people learn all of the technical aspects of digital storytelling together as a group. They're building rapport, they're learning how to use the video editing software, how to do some of the artistic things together as a group. They have lots of technological support in doing that. But the story circles are really sort of the heart of the intervention. So story circle 1, participants gather together and they pitch their idea. So in my work in bereavement, a lot of times people arrive to story circle 1 sort of with this idea that they're going to create like a montage video, and we have seen them. They're beautiful. There's a place for them, but that isn't really what we're going for in digital storytelling. So in story circle 1, we're really helping them dig deep and focus on the story that needs to be told, the one that might be a little bit challenging to tell, but it's focused on their experience. So they're getting lots of feedback about that. So then their homework is to go home and complete a written narrative that they then bring back to Story Circle 2 and share for the first time. And out of the whole intervention, Story Circle 2 is probably the most powerful because often it is the first time that people are verbalizing their experiences. And so it's very powerful to be able to witness and also see people connect in that process. And so their homework is to go home and sort of piece all of this together, where they are getting technological support if needed. And then they come back for Story Circle 3 and they share their final digital stories, and there's an opportunity for reflection. So I want to focus a tiny bit of attention to the use of digital storytelling and its ability to foster connection and meaning making in a population of bereaved parents. So I know that this talk is geared more towards dementia caregiving specifically, but in the spirit of taking a lifespan perspective on aging, I want to share with you this important research and why I really feel it emphasizes the power of digital storytelling as a tool for fostering connection. So this was true for a group of bereaved parents that I worked with. And this group of people live their life afraid to tell stories about their deceased child. Because as a society, we do not want to talk about how children die. Child death defies what we perceive to be the natural and expected progression of life, and that parents should not outlive their children. So again, this creates a crisis of meaning, and it makes it particularly challenging for bereaved parents to share their experiences because in general, we lack the ability to sit with their stories. When all the bereaved parent wants to do is talk about their deceased child, to share stories about how they died and how they were able to survive what most people in society deem unsurvivable. So in the middle of the pandemic, we launched a virtual digital storytelling workshop with a group of bereaved parents. And so we had a variety of different bereavement experiences. Some were bereaved by illness, some were bereaved by homicide and accident, and some were bereaved by suicide or drug overdose. And the interesting thing about this particular study was that as investigators, we actually thought we were doing them a favor by breaking them into breakout groups that was sort of centered on their bereavement experience. So we had a group for those who bereaved by illness, those who were bereaved by suicide and drug overdose, and those who were bereaved by homicide. They met together as a large group to learn the technical aspects of digital storytelling, but then they would break into their breakout groups to work through the details of crafting their story and sharing it with the group. And at the end of this workshop, what was fascinating is that at the end, most individuals shared that they would have preferred to hear everyone's story, that it didn't really matter how their child died. They wanted to hear the stories and they wanted to connect and unify over a common experience. So our investigative team recently conducted a phenomenological analysis of participants' reflections of their process engaging in digital storytelling. And this generated a rich description of a multifaceted phenomenon of connection as a pathway to meaning making in digital storytelling. So workshop participants described that they were able to form connections with other bereaved parents over this shared identity. And the workshop allowed them to continue to nurture bonds with their deceased child in a supportive community of peers that shared this life experience. So by connecting with others who shared the experience of the death of a child, participants in the workshop were better able to embody their identities as bereaved parents and enhance their existing connection with the deceased child through storytelling. So when the bereaved participate in digital storytelling, I have found this experience to be consistent across all study populations, regardless of age of death or type of death or age of participant. And in fact, a sample of bereaved dementia caregivers, we found that participants were able to connect over their stories in a way that fostered their ability to make sense of not only the death and subsequent grief of losing a loved one, but also their ability to make sense of their caregiving journey. Bereaved dementia caregivers were able to work collaboratively in their workshop group in a way that assisted them in the sense-making process. And this allowed them to begin to piece together their caregiving timeline and fully integrate this emotionally and physically exhaustive phase of their life into the overall story of their life. And for them, these experiences began to make sense, and they were part of their core identities as mothers, as daughters, as sons, as brothers and sisters, and as caregivers. And they were able to do this together in the safety of people who shared these identities, and they felt validated in these experiences. And in this social validation, were able to make meaning of it all. So I'm going to provide an example of a digital story. I chose this one because it best articulates the use of digital storytelling as a way to shift meaning, the meanings of the event, and incorporate it into the overall larger self-narrative. I do want to be clear that I have explicit consent to use this digital story in an educational capacity, but just wanted to let you know that the video itself can be a little bit triggering.
Knowledge is power, but sometimes I hate learning new things. Like that my husband had frontal temporal degeneration, also called FTD, which is a disease that results in the progressive damage to the temporal and frontal lobes of the brain. FTD is an early onset dementia. In my husband's case, it most likely started in his early 40s, right around the time my daughters were born. So although he was somewhat present in the early years, in many ways it has always just been the three of us. Dr. Robert Scott Hayward, my kind, handsome, strong, smart husband, went through the typical stages of frontal temporal degeneration. He first became obsessive and controlling. Then there was a period being confused and angry. There was also an almost lovely period of having a delightful, fun companion, wanting to be involved in every activity the girls and I did. Then ever so slowly, he became my third child. At first as the oldest, but quickly becoming the youngest. Scientifically, it was interesting to watch Rob's ability decline as my youngest increased. But emotionally, it was heartbreaking. Late one night in September 2016, his eyes turned black and never returned to normal. He lost control and tried to kill me and harm my daughter. Miraculously, we were physically unharmed, but that began an agonizing process of finding placement for him in a facility that could handle aggressive dementia patients. In November 2016, he officially became a resident of the North Village Park Care Facility. He continued to mentally and physically decline, and by February 2017, he was placed on hospice. In a short time frame that seemed like decades, his strong body failed him, just as his mind had. On April 18, 2017, Rob officially died. His body expired. It's been almost 3 months and I'm still processing the effects of his illness. I do not grieve the terrifying man who tried to kill me and harm my children. I know that was not Rob. In regard to the confused man in the nursing home whose body was failing him, I would not wish that fate on anyone, and know that Rob would not have wanted to continue in that state. I am relieved that he is out of agony, and glad that he is no longer suffering. It is going to take a long time to sift out what was Rob and what was his illness. My girls especially are on a long road to figuring this out. They never got to know the man I married that so many knew. I grieve for them at losing their dad so early and having to spend their formative years with a violent, confused man struggling with a terrible illness. I pray that they will be able to know that none of this is their fault and do not look back on these years with guilt. It is not their fault. I do not blame Rob for the actions of his illness. I grieve for what could have been, yet know it is not his fault. But I do not grieve his final death. I'm trying to be gentle on myself to let go of the weight of the illness because it is not my fault either.
So again, I chose this as an example because I feel it does really articulate the use of digital storytelling as a way to sort of make sense of the experience. But I did want to also say that this particular family, like they did digital storytelling together as a group. So the two daughters also did it. And what was really powerful is that it was the first time that they were able to, as a family, say, I am actually relieved that my dad died because of this whole process of, not wanting I guess they were afraid to say, I don't, have any, I feel sort of relieved that this person has expired. It's not necessarily him, it's the disease. And so their ability to do that together as a group was really, really powerful. Okay, so I'm going to come full circle. So here I am, a faculty member in one of the best medical schools in the country with a research program that's primarily focused on the use of storytelling and the way in which we can use this tool to connect with others and heal. And I have somehow convinced NIH that this is something that they need to be very much interested in. So I believe that stories have the ability to make people's hidden experiences visible. They help create relatability and solidify human connection. And as I noted throughout this talk, stories can be the foundation for relationship building over a shared identity. And this connectedness makes it possible for the people to no longer suffer in silence. And rather, through the process of storytelling, people can draw on others in times of adversity and develop coping mechanisms along the way. So colloquially, this is referred to as resilience. And many of us understand resilience as the human capacity to bounce back in the face of adversity. So in other words, you're able to return to a baseline after you've experienced a stressful or adverse life event. But I believe that stories can take people beyond resilience to a place of growth and true healing. And I have personally experienced this and witnessed the power of connecting over a story and its ability to help people make sense of their suffering and integrate it into the overall self-narrative. And in doing so, the storyteller is no longer suffering alone. And for many, there's no longer this tension between what could have been and what is in terms of their memories and their life experiences. And stories have the power to make people or to help people make sense of their new realities and these identities and to fully embrace them as part of their own. Stories have the power to connect and thus heal. And what's interesting is that this is not new information. So we all know that storytelling has been used as a healing capacity for centuries. But in my work, I've combined the old with the new, and I've discovered innovative ways to help people craft and share these intimate and often painful stories. So I typically begin each of my digital storytelling workshops with this reminder. So you may have arrived to this workshop with an idea of a story that you'd like to tell about a person you've cared for and who has died. These stories are important and meaningful. However, I encourage you to reflect on the story, on whether this is the story that needs to be told but hasn't. The story, that story may be the one that's the most difficult to tell. So let's go there together. And in doing so, participants of digital storytelling work through their story timeline, which actually has roots in sort of trauma work, timeline work. So they work through their storytelling timeline and work through piecing together their memories and details about the experience and the safety and support of others who have shared similar adversities. And at the end, they can breathe life into these words and they can finally share the story that deserves to be told. And this is actually the classic hero's journey that we've heard time and again in books, in poems, and movies, except this time, they're the ones who emerge on the other side of the experience stronger in the end. They're the ones who can face these trials, often very significant and stressful events that most people are unable to hold space for out of fear and discomfort, and they can face them with wisdom and strength. And the goal is for them to embrace these experiences as part of their new identities. This is growth and this is healing. And I just feel very privileged and honored to be able to do this work and to bear witness to this process. So I know that I'm getting close to time, but I know that I'm telling you things that you already know in this talk. So storytelling and connection it's really sort of at the heart of the work that geriatricians are doing, because I know that you all are drawn to context. But if there was a specific takeaway from today, it would be to continue to dig deep and peel away the layers alongside your patients and families. Sit with them in their stories, connect with them over these experiences, because for some, it can mean the difference in their ability to thrive and flourish during a difficult time. And so I know you all know that there's power in personal stories. I'm just here to collect the evidence and further underscore the importance of using storytelling in a clinical context. So I would really love to take a few minutes to hear from you all about whether there was a time in your clinical career that you were able to connect over a story with your patients and families. And then from there, I will take questions. Yes.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I love this kind of work. Obviously, I have a career in that is celebrating lots of stories. I also previously worked in childhood bereavement before coming to geriatrics, and I loved I think the power of what you're describing here is something that we saw a lot in the data that we were collecting through Judy's house. And one of the challenges we really had was trying to kind of identify and look at how this kind of intervention, like what the cost of inaction looks like, and how this kind of intervention impacts longer term outcomes. It was one that we had lots of creative solutions for, or tried to figure out creative solutions for, but it continued to kind of be a constant challenge. And I'm just wondering if you want to speak to how you are approaching that, or what ideas you've had.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And honestly, the question makes me sort of reflect back on the whole experience that we don't really have like the best guidelines for how to intervene in bereavement, because typically the majority of people have, they experience bereavement in a healthy way. I mean, grief is universally experienced. Literally, it's the only thing in life that 100% of the population will be able to experience in their lifetime. And so the majority of people do have sort of like a productive or adaptive grieving process. But in my work, I have found that when you experience sort of a traumatic loss, or if you, let's say in the caregiving realm, you experience lots of distress during the caregiving experience, that sort of distress has a direct impact on how you are able to cope. So really, I would love for my work to actually move upstream, and which is why I love doing this work in caregiving, because if you can start to help people make sense of and find meaning in those stressful life events, then they're better able to cope once they become bereaved. So the cost really is that there are some people who have what the literature terms or has coined prolonged or complicated grief. And that is what I want to mitigate. But for the large majority of people, we know how to grieve and we grieve well. But I do think that this work is powerful in terms of reducing the risk or the impact of the sort of grief intensity. And that's how I tend to use it. I don't know if I fully answered your question, but yeah. I am kind of curious to know if anyone in the room has used any storytelling methods. It doesn't have to be like, anything fancy, but you know, if there's a time that you've been able to sit with patients in their story, or you have, you've been particularly touched by a patient's story, I would love to offer some opportunity to share and reflect.
My first job was at a assisted living, and the best part of the job was listening to World War II vets come up to the desk. And basically my job was just there as social support. But that was kind of the start of my geriatrics journey. I think unfortunately in clinic, we have a lot of pressing demands, and it can be hard to listen to those stories.
Yeah.
But I think if you can get kernels and sort of piece together of a longitudinal relationship,
Yeah.
that's the goal.
Yeah. So it's interesting, because I tend to work on multidisciplinary teams. And so I think that what you described, the sort of stressors of like navigating the 15-minute window, like that fully underscores the importance of a multi-D team. So you can do some of this really powerful work. And then also, I wish that I could change that. I wish that, because I believe that I really do believe that physicians are storytellers. I believe that you all get into this work because you have a heart for stories and sitting with people in their stories. So I wish that there was a way that we could allow you all to do that. So.
Well, it's funny, Kate, that you say you don't have time, in clinic, but there's a lot happening in waiting rooms.
Yeah.
And I had this story yesterday. My mom had the opportunity of seeing Sophie yesterday. And in the waiting room, she apparently met this woman who was 91 and had just lost her husband. And I think it was a pretty traumatic loss. And so the two of them were processing, not that she waited long, but yeah.
Yeah.
They were probably
Oh
fast
my gosh, I
friends.
love that.
So I just, there's all these peer opportunities, right? Where there's kind of these informal and
Yeah.
potential opportunities that I think are out there. But I wanted to ask you specifically about people being stuck and how you've seen storytelling, or if you've seen
Yeah.
storytelling. I'm thinking of a particular woman whose young son, so 20 something, died of a cancer, and it was missed for a long time.
Yeah.
And she just was struggling on, finding a path forward.
Yeah.
And it felt like there was
Yeah.
something that
Yeah.
could have been,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's actually, I'm guessing, because of fragmented memory. So, for those who are sort of stooped in the trauma world, a lot of what we do is help people piece together a fragmented memory, because when you have a fragmented memory and you approach a trigger, your mind is really fancy and it does not want you to have to think about that. And so it does that as a protective factor. But so when you approach those triggers, it creates a lot of distress, or it makes it impossible for people to move beyond, or they feel stuck and things like that. So I have, in all of my digital storytelling work, it is very much rooted in this sort of narrative exposure therapy process, where they're piecing together the timeline. And in doing that, they're starting to break down their fragmented memories. So they're approaching those triggers with choice and control, rather than, being forced to approach them because they see something that reminds them of their child or their loved one. And so that's one way that I have seen this sort of impact the process of being stuck.
She said, this is the comment from Christy Wood in the chat. I absolutely love your talk and work. Could you talk a little bit more about the storytelling intervention bridges, or I'm sorry, about how the storytelling intervention bridges the gap between what is and what could be?
Yeah, so it's very much attention to detail, Christy. That is a direct quote from my talk. No, so really that kind of goes back to this sort of fragmented memory piece. The storytelling process, or at least in my work, is I'm really allowing people to create timelines that make sense for them and are cohesive and they fit within this sort of larger narrative, which when you experience a stressful life event, that doesn't happen. And so, and it also kind of ties back to this crisis of meaning. So we have all of these social constructs that create a world that we think we should be living in. So kind of going back to the child death, like as a society, we should, as parents, not outlive our children. And so that is the what could have been, right? But the what is that you lost your child. And so you're using the storytelling process as a way to make sense of that phenomenon. So, I don't know if I fully answered it, but if you want to touch base with me, we're going to meet later today. I'd love to dive deeper in that with you.
I have a question, and I know that you practice clinically.
Yeah.
So in clinical practice, what are some of the question prompts that you have found helpful to sort of open up a door for even a brief
Yeah.
storytelling experience?
Yeah, so tell me more about that would really take you a long way. So tell me more about that. Or, you know, what's your typical day like? What's your life like? And honestly, sort of approaching that through, you know, open-ended questioning, that invites people to really start to tell their story, because they can go down, oh, well, you know, my day, like I had to take my kids to school and I have 2 kids. And by the way, we love to be outside. And my daughter, she rides horses and she really fell in love with this horse. I mean, it's really an opportunity for people to just sort of let you in when you say things like, tell me more about that. What's your day like? You know, and things like that. But also, I do use photos a lot. So people have photos, literally thousands of them on their phone. And when I feel like a patient or family member is stuck, I just say, hey, show me a picture of that, because chances are they have that. And that tangible tool really breaks the ice. It allows them to sort of refocus. They're not feeling pressure, you know, the eye contact thing, to refocus and say, oh yeah, this did happen in my life. And oh, look at this beautiful photo. And so yeah. And if you want to dive deeper in like the prompts around that, I could say things like, well, what do you see here in this image? What's really happening here? And so that would sort of have them engage in, well, this is how I'm really feeling about this experience or this particular photo. Yeah.
Thanks for bringing us into your journey and story this morning. Let's
you.
thank Abby.
Yeah.
We have division meetings soon, but before we do that, I wonder where the sign up is, because we have 3 book giveaways. And did anyone not have a chance to sign in?